right, I'll kind of get started because the beginning of this isn't that important.
And everything else goes down.
So, all right, so let's do this. So I'm gonna aim for this to be somewhere in the neighborhood of half an hour, and I might go a little bit over, I might go a little under. But the earlier we get done, the more we can just talk and drink beer. So if just make me go faster. All right, so what this talk is not. This talk is not the Ember guides. I was really struggling when I was like trying to put this talk together because I initially titled it as an intro to Ember. Then I realized there's a lot of really good introductory material out there on Ember, and that wasn't the case when I started. So my initial thought was like, well, what did I want when I first started Ember? And then I realized what I wanted when I first started Ember already exists, so I should try to do something slightly different. So this talk is also not like a paid course. Like I'm not super good at Ember. I'm average. This is the Warming Up with Ember course that just came out on Code School. I think it's, I don't know how much it is, but it's not super expensive. So if you're looking for something even better than the guides, maybe go with this.
$29 a month for all of Code School.
So if you just get $29 and then just blast through them, you'll be all set.
They do their Ember stuff in a day.
Yeah. So this talk is also not a talk by one of these people. These are all the core contributors to Ember. I've dealt with most of them either in person or in IRC. They're all way smarter than I am, like leagues above me. Like Yehuda is like kind of freaky. Like he just kind of shakes and talks and just blows your mind. It's pretty awesome. So so that's not what this talk is. So who am I? I'm Ray Tiley pretty much everywhere. I work here at Tightrope Media Systems. Thank you, Tightrope, for buying the pizza. Really appreciate it. And for buying the beer and for paying the electricity. I think that's pretty much all they did. So that's my picture almost on all my profiles. It's like 4 or 5 years old, but I think it makes me look less fat. If you Google for me, that's my dad. That is not me. That is my dad. Just ignore him. He has a website. It looks really, really bad. All right, so what is this talk actually? This is what these are the questions I wanted to answer for everyone that decided to come to the first Ember meetup. I wanted to answer why did my company choose Ember? Why did essentially I choose Ember? Because I was the driving force behind us going for Ember. What's keeping us/me super excited about Ember? And then, where can you go to get those resources that this talk is not? Like, where are the guides and all that stuff? So let's get started. So this is Ember in 3 acts, and this is Act 1, why we chose Ember. So first we need to know what we do. So if you haven't noticed, we make video stuff. This is Wayne's World, it's public access. This is pretty much our customer. We sell to like Wayne and his buddies that have a TV station. We sell them their automation systems. It's how they basically make like late night, like hothead TV happen. So it's all web driven, so they control it through a web browser, but we also deal with a lot of hardware. We do a lot of stuff. It's kind of crazy what we do when you think about it, that it's basically me and that guy behind the camera doing it. So we have this product that like controls your TV station. It is your TV station. And all of our customers need websites. They all have to have a website, especially nowadays. And so our product is already like the single source of truth for their station. It is what drives their schedules. It's what puts stuff out on their channels. It's where they enter in all the information about Wayne's World and all those other public access shows that air on those channels that always, seem to go out in the middle of the night. So, so we have this API. For anyone that has looked at code like this, you can tell that this is PHP accessing a SOAP web service. So SOAP is, probably older than I am. And it was, pretty good back in the day, but it's getting a little antiquated. And the other problem that we had was, so this is like the API that we had. It doesn't look exactly like this. I just kind of made it up, but somewhat similar. So we have this web app, which is on the left, and we have a web service, SOAP, on the right. And we just started to get a lot of bugs. So the problem was, like, we have this web app, and we add new features to it. We would always forget to go add the same information or features to the web API. Or we would add a feature to the web API. This never happened. We never improved our APIs. Why would we improve our APIs? Only nerds see APIs. So we would just totally forget to add stuff to our API all the time. but our customers really, really, really need our API. It's like really important. It's the reason why we outsell our competitors sometimes. If we have an API, they don't. So we needed to kind of fix that. So we decided to do a REST API, bring it up to date, one API to rule them all. So we're going to create an API, that's going to be our product basically, and then we're going to build our application on top of our own API. We're going to, eat our own dog food. So it's funny, Ryan, he basically said everything I'm going to say in this first part of my talk without pictures. So I'm just adding the pictures to it. So back in July 2012, we decided to go on this venture. We weren't in our current engineering. I was pretty much solely in charge of this product. So it was like by myself, I get to do whatever I want. So cool, we're going to do this web API thing. We're going to have to build this JavaScript application on top of it that consumes the API. And so back in July 2012, I looked it up. Backbone was at 0.92. Ember was at 0.9.8.1. I mean, it seems like there's an extra number there. And Angular is at 101. I think it just reached like 1 and then had like 0.01 like right after. The thing is like everyone else back then, I had only ever heard of Backbone. I had never really heard of Ember, hadn't heard of Angular. So I started down the back road path and was super excited about it. Like got some stuff going really quickly, but just kind of ran into sort of lots and lots of problems. Like I was pretty new to the JavaScript front end stuff, and eventually the kind of weight of it all, like it just kind of snowballed, and we had to move on to other things, and we decided to like scrap it for right now. We'll come back to it later. We have some more important things to work on. The main problems we had with Backbone, at least that I had, was I didn't know how to structure my application. I didn't know how to put it all together. And every time I got like 90% structured, I read someone else's blog post and they did it way better than I did, so I had to scratch everything and do it over again. The other problem we had with Backbone, or I had, I mean it was totally me developing it at that point, was keeping track of like when I needed to re-render views and when I didn't, and keeping track of DOM when I was rendering views. I had this application once that like Chrome ate so much memory that it like caused my SQL Server to crash. So, because they were running on my same dev machine, like it just started, like Chrome started swapping my machine like crazy. So, so I had issues managing my Backbone code. Like it just wasn't basically structured enough for me as a beginner. And they pride themselves on that, and that's awesome. It's an awesome framework. It just didn't work for me at the time. I could probably go back now and write an awesome Backbone app, but I'm not. So we took a break, and then I finally heard about this thing, Ember. And then I wrote this little project in it for class. Some of you were in my class, you might have seen the project. And I wrote it in like a weekend, and it was kind of complex yet really structured, and I was really, really, really happy with it. And so I was really, really excited about Ember, and that's when I decided to like, hey, we should use Ember, and I like basically just made that decision and didn't talk to anyone else. So why was I able to convince everyone else at my company to use Ember, or really that guy in the yellow shirt back there? Well, there's a few reasons. So the first thing you need to know about our app is it's kind of big. It has a lot of configuration screens. It has a lot of, especially when they were written, were pretty complicated JavaScript interaction stuff. Like it has drag and drop scheduling and like Ajax-y, updatey stuff, but it was all written like 10 years ago. And so like there was no MooTools, there was no prototype, there was like no jQuery when it was all written. Like it's all really, really bad vanilla JavaScript because the DOM APIs and all that stuff at that time were really bad. So, so we have a big app, and it would just be extremely way too painful for us to change it all at once. So we kind of had to piecemeal it out. So this is our app. Our app is Borg. Basically, it's stitched together. We're still running a lot of legacy code in our app, but we're kind of gluing this Ember app on top of it. And that led to an interesting problem of we need to get around our app. Like we need to be able to basically instantiate the Ember app at different points. It's not like some of the modern JavaScript apps like where they don't have any URL support. You just enter them and they're booted. It's like we need to be able to get you to a certain spot in the app with a certain state. And what solved that for us was the Ember router. So if anyone doesn't know what the Ember router is, it's basically a finite state machine for your application that is driven by URL changes. So When you need to get to a certain spot in your app, it's defined by the router. The router is responsible for loading different pieces of information depending on where the user is in your app. Conversely, if someone changes state in your app that was derived from the URL, that URL then updates, which gets them this mechanism of copying and pasting the link and sharing it with someone or bookmarking it or doing any of that stuff, which was traditionally very hard in these JavaScript apps. I know Angular has a router now, and I think Backbone has one that you can use. The interesting thing about the Ember router is it's actually a microlib that's completely dependent of Ember. So you can go to, I think it's on tilde.io or github/tilde router.js. You can use the router in any of your applications, whether they be Backbone, Angular, or just straight JavaScript. And it's just a really slick way of handling the URL and responding to changes in the URL. And that worked really nice for us. So you can see, like, this is our app. Don't judge us by our theming, because we still have to make it look like the really old app until we're done rewriting it and then we can reskin it. So we purposefully made it look bad. It was like the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but we did it anyway. But you can see we're getting to the spot in our app, and so app.aspx, we're using some like really old ASP.NET stuff to serve out the page. But you can see we're going to files. That long number is the file ID of the file that's showing up in the right there. So that's like the detail look. The fact that we're in /files is showing the list of files on the end, and then we're using some query parameters, so like that page and that status, to basically do some filtering. So like that status drives the tabs and the page drives the pagination. There's also another query parameter that isn't loaded right now, which would do the search filtering, so it would filter by a custom input by the user. And that all gets serialized in the URL. So if the user needs to, if they want to see all their valid files on their system, and they want to sort it in a specific way and filter it by the word monkey, they can do that. It all updates the URL. They can copy, paste that, come back to it later, bookmark it, do all that stuff. So we get all that out of the box without having to do anything special in Ember. So this is kind of how you define a route. So you do the router, you map a resource. Basically, a resource is a thing, and a route, this .route is something that you do with a thing. So in this one we're mapping resource, so we have a post. We get a dynamic segment, which is like kind of Railsy, that colon post ID, so that means that that's going to be replaced by something in the URL, and that will get passed to when we invoke that route, so we can use that ID to like look up a specific post. Nested inside that post, so is the edit route, and then also nested inside that post resource is the comments route, so we can go to post/some number /comments, get all the comments for that post. And then further, even nested inside the comments resource is the new. So if we want to create a new comment, we would go to post/some ID /comments/new. So this is kind of how you define it, and then because of this, the way you define it, you get a bunch of stuff. You get a post route, a post controller, a post view, a post template. You get all that stuff. You don't need to create it all. If you don't create it, Ember will kind of auto-generate some of it for you. But you get it all, and it's very structured. And that's what I really liked about this too. Not only that it let me drive my app from the URL, but there was like a clear-cut thing that I didn't have in Backbone, which is like, hey, you put code here, that's where it belongs. And that was really nice for me starting out with Ember. So the next reason why we kind of chose Ember, data binding. So this is another view from our app. Again, I had to make it look really bad. Don't judge me on it. But this is kind of like a dynamic area of our app where the customer defines how a specific show, so something you watch on air, where it's gonna come from. So in this, we have different reels. One of them's a DVD, the other one's a tape, the other one's a live feed, like a satellite. And there's they all have a length property. Those formats, that drop down, that's what decides what like properties we should show, like length, and queue, or title, chapter. Some of those properties don't make sense. They also, that total runtime there at the top, that's driven off of all the lengths combined. So traditionally, like, when we did this before we had all this, we had to, add event listeners to each and every length field, and whenever that changed, we had to redo a calculation, and then we had to update the total runtime. The other thing that's interesting is that some of these fields, like if they're depending on the type of format it is, they can only have a max length, because if they're backed by a file, they can't be more than the file is in length, so they can't go over. So there's a lot of dependencies on the data here, and when we were doing it in jQuery, or actually before we even had jQuery, when we were just doing it raw JavaScript, it's like every time we added a little feature, we had to remember, like, oh, when that changes, we also have to do this. And when that changes, we also have to do that. And then if they click over here, we have to remember to re-add that data binding because we re-changed the forms. And so that got very confusing. Very, if you have one of those jQuery apps, it's like you have like 5 different places where you're attaching event handlers to the same like text input element. And in Ember, you get to do these things like you have this object model. And this has nothing to do with how you save data on the server. It's all in your JavaScript app. So we have this Ember object, and we have some properties. So when we call extend on Ember object, we're basically defining a class. So we're going to define a person class here that has a first and last name. And then we have a full name. And all that full name function is going to do is it's going to return the first and last name with a space in between them. And then we call .property on that function, so we're extending the function prototype. Ember does that for us. We call property, and we put first name and last name, and those are the 2 keys that we use in that full name. So anytime that we update our first name or last name, Ember's automatically going to know that that full name property also changes and update that anywhere we use that property too. And that traverses everywhere. So no matter in what template, what component, wherever we're using that full name property, if we update the first name or the last name, it updates for us. And in order to use this, you have to use like the Ember get set. Some people don't like having to use get set functions, but it enables all of this, and it's really slick. Ryan kind of mentioned it when you start having like multiple filters, and the filters are really just additional bindings on top of other bindings, and it all just works. And you kind of set up like simple things like full name instead of having to know that when first name or last name changes, I also have to change full name here. I also have to change it where I used it in the user login form. I also have to change it over in the footer where I say thank you full name for like coming to my website. So it's really awesome when you use the same property over and over again. You don't have to worry that you're using it again. You already know that the data binding is going to take care of it. So this is like how you kind of define your own computer property. There's also a lot of built-in computer properties. So you get like alias, which says like use a different property. So like if you have a long property chain, you can alias it to something shorter that's easier to remember. You have some array ones, like there's a map function. You have some ones that deal with comparison, filter by, like filtering, default, all that stuff. So you get a bunch of these together, a bunch of these out of the box that you can use to really build up complicated computer properties. And they all data bind, they all just like flow through the system. And when we get to what's keeping me excited about Ember, you're going to see where this is going and why it's really cool. So the other thing that I kind of mentioned when I was talking about the router that kept me really excited, or got me really into Ember, was just the structure. And I don't have anything past this. Like really, like the Ember, because you define everything in a route, that creates a model of, or not a model, but a route, a controller view, and a template for you. It's really clear cut where you put different code. And that enabled me to reason about my app, and I didn't get to that point where I wrote 90% of it and then, oh, I have to rewrite it all because I found a better way to structure it. It was already structured well. There is some stuff going on in Ember right now. If you're not aware of Ember AppKit, anyone play around with that at all? They're going to basically try to bring that into core a little bit and go even one step further and be kind of Railsy, and where we have a directory structure we want you to use. And we provide you with some build tools. And if you follow our directory structure and use our build tools, you can break out things into your own files, into independent files. You can have templates defined in their own files, and it will just all build it for you. You won't have to worry about loading JavaScript in the right order and all that stuff. So it's going to get even better, which is kind of cool. So Like I said, I signed up for the Angular meetup, and they're like, "Hey, what do you want to like know about?" And I'm like, "I also want to know why Angular sucks. Tell me." Not because like I hate Angular or anything. I actually like really respect Angular. I want to really learn more about it. I went to their meetup last night and looked like a total noob because I didn't know what a directive was. But I'm learning. Ember has some pain points, and I thought everyone should know about those a little bit too. So when we were building our app, we definitely had some pain points. Rendering large lists really sucked. So if anyone's ever seen a chart like this is like a Chrome timeline, and that big yellow thing with all the garbage collections and the parsing HTML, that's us loading like 5,000 records for the server and try to list it in one big table. Which, when you think about it, it's like, why are you trying to list 5,000 things in one page? Like, what kind of UI is that? And that's what it ultimately came back down to. But the fact that we couldn't do it kind of pissed me off. And we'll kind of get to that. That's why there's an asterisk, because this is kind of changing too. But if you're doing really large lists, you kind of have to work around it. You either have to use something like Adapar, I think that's the name of the company, has something called list view. Someone else has one called table view. And what they do is they kind of do more of like a native experience where they only like show you like 25 things that fit in your viewport at a time, and as you scroll it dynamically unload stuff out of memory and put stuff back into memory. Those things work really well. They had some limitations for us, mostly that the one that's really popular doesn't really work with flexible height UIs. Like if your height is going to change a lot, it doesn't really adapt that well. So we actually ended up changing our UI because of this limitation, which actually in the long run ended up being a way better UI. That's that UI with the search bar and the pagination. At first that was just like one huge list. And looking back, it's like, what the hell were we thinking? So Ember actually saved us in this one. Its shitty performance at rendering large lists actually made us make our app better. The other thing is initially we were using Ember data, and I think that's really hurt Ember a lot because everyone's like, well, Ember and Ember data have to use them together. You do not have to use them together. If you had to use them together, they would be in the same repository. And one wouldn't be production release 1.0 and the other would be like alpha 5.5.9 so you don't have to use them together, but we were trying it. We were like on the bleeding edge trying to use Ember data. And for basic like CRUD from a REST API, it worked beautifully. Especially if you're familiar with Rails, if you have an has many through relationship, it was utterly impossible. Because Ember data tried to be this like crazy JavaScript ORM, and it didn't have any support for like, hey, like you're not doing this right. Let me tell you how to save my model properly. It didn't have that support. It basically would like try to save something before its dependency was saved, which meant the server would return an error because it didn't have the proper like foreign key and stuff like that. So that was a huge pain point for us. We kind of got around that, as Ryan said, by using this library EmberModel. EmberModel is a lot simpler than Ember data. I am the number 3 contributor right now on it, but we haven't had to touch it in a few months because we basically fixed all the problems we had with it, and we've been using it in production for the last 5 or 6 months. And it's been working really good for us. Development on it is slowed way down, and that's either because Ember data is getting a lot better. We'll get to that in a second. Ember data is getting a lot better. It's kind of adopted some of the things that EmberModel was doing, but it still tries to solve a much bigger problem than EmberModel. The other thing is like everyone that's using EmberModel, like me, who like wanted to fix a bunch of bugs in it, we're all using it and it works for us. So like, why the hell are we going to keep spending our time on it? So I kind of think too that's why development has slowed down a bit on it, because the people reporting bugs right now, they're like reporting like really wacky things, and it's like, well, don't do that. So there's another one too that I haven't used but looks really cool. It's called Ember Persistence Framework. It's by this guy Gordy Hampton out of somewhere. That tries to be like crazy, like awesome at like persisting your stuff and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Philosophically, what's the main thrust of difference between Ember data and Ember model?
So
models are more lightweight.
yeah, so Ember model was out of the gate like tried to be lightweight. Like when it first came out, it had no support for relationships at all. Like they finally added that in, and then I like fixed a bunch of bugs in it and added some support for some cool stuff. But it's very every model that you use has its own serializer and adapter, and you can like reuse like a class that you define and reuse it for everywhere. But you're basically supposed to like set up each model on its own. Where Ember data is like a lot more knows about other things more and will like, especially before Ember model got relationships, like handle relationships for you better. Ember data also tried to support things like rolling back and all that stuff, and I don't know where the support is for that. Basically, Ember data went through a branch called J.J. Abrams, which J.J. Abrams is like known for rebooting things, like doing the reboots. And so Yehuda Wycatz, who's like as everyone calls him, the busiest guy in open source, like Ember core, jQuery core, Rails core, wrote handlebars. Like
Is he on the JavaScript spec?
yeah, he's on the spec. So if you follow him, you get all these things like this guy just accepted for tag committee, and I'm like, I have no idea what tag committee is, but that's awesome. So he like spent like a month, like I think it was like 2 or 3 months ago, just like knocking out all his Ember data issues, and it got a lot simpler. He like incorporated some of what I think were the concepts from Ember model, like you can use your own adapter and serializer for like a single model. So if you have like a model in your API that's just really out there, you can kind of like call it out and make it act differently than the rest. But then it still has the more complete support for relationships. There's actually a branch right now called SSOT, which is like the single source of truth branch, which is attempting to make it so that the relationships are really kind of nailed down, so that when you update a model that's like as it belongs to or has many relationship on another model, that all your data binding works like as you would expect it, not just as the data binding works out of the box. So Ember data is getting a lot better. You also don't have to use any of these data persistence frameworks at all. You can roll your own. You can, in your Ember router in your model hook where it asks you to like, what data do you want for this request? You can just go straight to jQuery if you want to. The promise support everywhere in Ember is really good now, so it's really awesome. So you don't have to use the data. We struggled with it, found a workaround, and I think Ember data is getting to the point where in our next like major release, we might try to switch back to it. So there's a lot more about Ember that made us like it, but those were the main things that really sold us on it. But these are all awesome things that Ember has too. I'm not going to talk about them, but components briefly are Ember's attempt to implement the web components API that's like part of some future, I don't even know what they're calling HTML5 after HTML5. I think it just becomes HTML now, and they're just going to keep on adding stuff to it. I don't think there's like a 6 or a 7. So components are cool. A component is a view. So before I knew about components, I knew about views, and views are cool too. Views allow you basically they're responsible for like rendering stuff and like basically telling what templates to do. But what they really allow you to do is encapsulate DOM events, so like clicks and scrolls and all that stuff, into meaningful things in your application. So when someone clicks on this, it really means submit to your application. Or when someone like adjusts a slider, it really means like change the RGB color value by this much. So it takes like user interaction and turns it into like semantic meaningful stuff in your app. Controllers are this way of like keeping track of in-application state. The run loop is a performance thing that's pretty cool. It's really complicated too. You don't really have to know about it in order to use Ember unless you're getting some like really nifty testing stuff or some crazy like Ember core stuff. But it's really cool. It's also a microlib, so if you find Backburner.js, you can use the run loop in your Backbone or Angular apps. RSVP is who's using JavaScript promises. I think pretty much everyone is now, even if you don't know it, because jQuery returns promise-like objects. But RSVP.js is another microlib that is by the Ember people, and it's their implementation of promises. I'm one of the people that helped promisify all of Ember model, so I got to learn way more about promises than I wanted to, but they're really cool. They make your callbacks go way less deep in JavaScript. So those are some other things that are cool about promises. So that's why we liked Ember. And these next two acts are going to go a lot faster because I don't have as much to say about them. So don't worry, even though it's already 7:57, we will still have more time to drink beer. All right, so HTML bars. Has anyone heard of HTML bars? All right, so HTML bars. So you know how I said Ember really sucked at rendering lists? It's because like the way handlebars works now is it really is just like a string, that word where you put strings together, interpolator, blah, blah, blah. Like it's JavaScript code, but it's using a lot of strings. It doesn't know anything about HTML. It really doesn't know anything about DOM at all. It just builds a huge string, puts it in the DOM, and the browser renders it. What HTML bars is going to do, as far as I could be totally getting all this wrong too. Like I spent hours in the IRC trying to ask people questions about this shit, so I can tell you. But a lot of it is like whoosh. So HTML bars basically it knows about DOM, it knows about HTML. It emits DOM instead of strings, essentially. So, and then this guy, Eric Byron, and this other guy, Chris Selden, were in Seattle last week. There's all these pictures on Twitter of like minds being blown because they figured out these awesome things to speed things up way, like clone node and other crazy JavaScript primitive stuff that I don't even know about. But essentially what it means is it's going to be way faster because you're not doing all this string manipulation, you're working with actual DOM. What happens like when an element, like those computed properties that we talked about, when one of them changes, instead of having to build up a huge string to reinsert into the DOM somewhere, all it has to do is it has a graph, your object graph, it knows what node change, it actually now has a node tree, and it knows what node in the DOM to change. So it just changes that node. So it's way faster, supposedly. It also leads to better handlebar syntax. So if you use Ember at all and try to like bind to classes or images or anything like that, anytime when you're in an HTML element, you have to use this bind adder helper. And that's because of metamorph. We'll get to that in a second. But because HTML bars knows about the DOM, you don't need to do this anymore. So instead of doing bind adder class equals foo, you can just do class equals mustache foo. So
where did the title go?
What's that?
You have title inside. Is that intentionally removed?
Oh, yeah, I just forgot to put the title on. So yeah, bring the title back down, and then they will be equivalent. Sorry. Damn it! All right. So the other thing that you get rid of, has anyone ever saw that tweet that like Tom Dale got all like, emo about, where someone said I viewed source on an Ember app and it made me want to barf? Well, so that's why you get all these metamorph tags, and the metamorph, what that's doing is it's like surrounding your DOM elements, your dynamic elements, and it's basically like keeping track of like events that happen on them or events that happen on your models and knows to replace stuff. Well, because HTML bars knows about DOM, you don't need all these metamorphs because you already have the DOM tree in the HTML, mustache, graph. These are all terms I heard floated around on IRC and trying to sound really smart. But basically you don't need all of that, so you just, like when you view source, you get regular HTML now. It'll be really sweet. And that's another reason why it's faster, because you're not dumping all this extra script tag into the DOM.
Was that person similarly bothered by machine code they looked at? Or?
I don't know. Yeah, probably. But when you're debugging HTML, you look at this stuff. Like I look at this stuff all the time, and
it is like what the heck.
Yeah, and I've gotten like metamorph goggles now. Like I don't see the metamorph anywhere, but when it goes away, I'll be so happy. All right, so composable computer properties.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So where on the deployment spectrum is HTML bar?
So we'll kind of go over that. So HTML bars is still like it's in active development now, which it wasn't for a while. Like YCats did one of those things where he like wrote a bunch of code that was awesome but wasn't quite usable yet, but like really illustrated his idea. And then his like other people are kind of taking the torch and running with it, and that kind of there's a big gap in between when those two things happened. But like I said, the two Ember core team members were in Seattle last week. They're actively working on HTML bars. I think they're trying to get it into like a canary or a beta in the next few releases. So I'd probably say in the next few months you should be able to download it and run it. You can't do that right now.
You said it was going to be in a feature flag by Q1.
Is it? Awesome. So yeah, like I asked like last week, like, hey, can I try it? And they're like, no, no. All right, so composable computer properties. This, on the other hand, is in Canary. You can go download the Canary right now from, so Ember is on a Chrome-like release cycle where they have Canary beta and release stable, and they ship those every 6 weeks. So if it's in Canary now, unless there's like a no-go thing, like there's some critical bug found in it, you can expect it to be in beta within 6 weeks and then final in release production ready 12 weeks after it hits Canary. So some things kind of linger longer. I'll get to one of those in a second. Some get pushed through a lot faster, but composable computer properties is in Canary. So what are those? Those are basically computed properties that can take other computed properties. They don't really offer, as far as I can tell, any real performance gain, but they let you be able to do things without having to define a bunch of intermediate computed properties just to be able to do. So you can see here that we're taking a bunch of computer properties and we're just assigning them to the variables so we can reuse them without having to type all that out before. We're extending an object, so we're creating a new class that has a names property. And that is a sort that inside of it has a union that inside of that has a map by. Actually has two map bys and then just another property. And then the sort is, so the sort takes the union, so it takes like an array type thing. That union will eventually resolve to an array. And then it takes a comparator. Ember compare is the default one. So then we create one, and then we can call basically that object dot named. And I should have given you the test output. This is like a test I copied from the Ember source code. But basically what this will do is it will map the people properties. So we're defining a people, like when we create this object, we're passing in an array of people that have a first name and last name, and then we give it some cats. Who knows? So we're going to map people by first name. So we're going to get an array of all the first names that are in people. We're going to map people by last name. So we're getting an array of all the last name in people. And then we're also passing it the cats array. And then that's then going to bubble out to the sort. So what's cool about this composable computed properties, is that if any of those properties change, it all bubbles up so you get assorted names of all your cats and first name and last names. Does that make sense? That one's like, I had to read the code like 2 times. This is like kind of a contrived example. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but when you see some of the computed properties like in the tests and stuff, they are a lot simpler. You don't have to have all these intermediate computed properties, which in our app we have a lot of. We have a lot of like intermediate computed properties that then get consumed by other computer properties. And what's nice about this is like, you always have to define the properties, like what they depend on. And if you have like a big long chain, you got to get that chain right of dependencies, or else your final computer property doesn't get computed right. This kind of simplifies all that at least a bit. So it looks pretty cool. A lot of people are really excited about it. This is the functional syntax. They're working right now on a chaining syntax, so it won't have to be this complicated if you're not into that whole functional thing. Unlike Brendan over here.
I was going to say.
This is what Brendan, my buddy over here in the purple shirt, he's going to love this. All right, so sub-expression support in Handlebar. So that's in Canary right now, and yes, it's kind of like Lisp. So what this is so if you have handlebars templates right now, you can call a helper, and the helper can take some arguments, but you can't really nest those together. You can't pass one helper's output to another helper's output. With sub-expressions, you can do that, and so what happens, the sub-expression syntax is this parentheses, basically. So the innermost set of parentheses gets evaluated, and it's just a handlebars helper, so like 2 lower will take the value argument and make it all lowercase. That will then get passed to the equals helper, which takes 2 arguments, which is the string test and then the output of that other sub-expression. And then that all gets evaluated and gets tested by the if helper. So basically what this is if test is equal to lowercase my value. And if it's doing that, we enter the if statement. If not, we don't enter the if statement. So what this allows you to do is allows you to, if you've ever written a handlebars helper and you're like, well, I only want to enter this code if I have more than 10 comments or something like that. you would have to create a property on your controller or something, or your model that says like, has more than 10, and it's like, why do I have to do that just to get a Boolean value that I can use in an if? Now you can have like a sub-expression where you have a greater than helper, and that greater than helper gets passed in some other stuff, and they all evaluate out, and you can use that. So sub-expressions and handlebars, you can play with that now. It's something that I'm about to talk about uses, so the query param support. This is what I spent last weekend working on. So this is my first commit to Ember, is I helped out on some of this query param stuff. I actually ended up getting 2 commits in the micro libraries and then 2 corresponding commits in Ember core. That's in Canary. You can play around with it now, and I'm actually going to show a quick example. So it's on the wrong screen. Where'd it go? All right, so this is a JS bin. So you can see here that we got all this stuff up in the query parameter, and as I start changing it, it updates the URL, like right away. I don't have to mess around with it. You can see I linked to it and it had all that stuff, so I can link to Selden. I can update my page size, so I can do a page size of 10, which means I'm on the wrong page now. So this was really important to us, query parameters. We're using it in our app now. It was under a feature flag for a really long time. And then kind of the core people were like, it's not really what we want. It was hooked on the route. It wasn't, and everyone agreed that query params should kind of be controller-bound properties. But this is really slick in that, so to set up a query param, so we hide the CSS and the HTML and the output. So up here in our route, we're just pushing a bunch of people. We're like figuring out a bunch of people. This increment page is just an action where we're doing that. The real meat is right here. Is we have this application controller, so that's the controller we're in, and then we have an array. We need a sort by, a page size, and a filter. And then what that code does is then binds those query params to the page size, the sort by, and the filter properties on our controller. And it's all data bound. So if someone edits it in the URL, it automatically adjusts our controller properties. And if we adjust the controller properties, it automatically adjusts the URL. So the interaction with the URL is all taken care of by data binding. And so it's really simple to, when we're doing the pages, which just depends on the page size and the length of our content, we just get the page size, determine the length, do a little math, push that content in and return it. Same thing for like the number of pages, just depends on the page size and the arranged content. But this was really cool. It was a lot of fun to work on. It's in Canary now, so you can play around with it. The reason why I say it uses the so if you looked at the output, you can see that the page that you're on has this, it's bold. It has an active class applied to it. That's one of the things I helped out with, which was fun. I wrote a bunch of tests. And then how that works is all you have to do is, where is it? So right here. So we're going to go through each page, and then we're going to do a link to. N is the number, so that's going to be the text. And then we pass in a sub-expression, which is query params, and then we set whatever query params we want to change. What's cool about the query param stuff is that query params are sticky. So you get the active class as long as your query param change doesn't change the query param you passed in. It doesn't change anything. So we don't have to pass in the previous page, the next page, and all that other stuff. For this link, we just change the one query page that we're changing, and then it is active, the HTML highlighting all works out of the box. We don't have to do anything special to say well, if I'm on this page, also add this class and do all that stuff. It just works. So that was really fun. I had a good time with that. And then, so that's in Canary. You can use it now. If you have any problems with it, let me know, because I'm going to try to fix some more things. And get a few more commits in Ember, and that'll be fun. All right, so Act 3. This one's going to be really short. It's 8:11. We'll be having more beer by 8:15. All right, so Ember.js guides. This is free. Go read them. If these guides had existed when I first started Ember, it would have been awesome. There's been a whole lot of work put into them. They're actually really, really awesome now. They used to be non-existent. So check them out. The guides are pretty good. The Code School course is, someone said $29 a month. I haven't checked it out personally because I think I'm a little bit beyond that Code School course now. But they have a really awesome background. Tiley, who is the company that YCats and Tom Dale and all those people and one of the other core people work for on the Ember project, they do intro to Ember training. It's expensive, way more expensive than a Code School course. Like I think the in-person course is like $1,500, but they just released like the full course online for like $700, which is still expensive, but you know, if you're getting work to pay for this, who cares? It's not your money. So other resources, Ember Watch is an awesome website. They also have a Twitter handle. They kind of aggregate all the cool stuff going on in Ember, Talk, Screencast. We're recording this, so there's a good possibility that this might be up there, which is really nerve-wracking to me. Ember Weekly is a newsletter that kind of, you get a lot of the same stuff that Ember Watch has, but it gets delivered directly to your inbox, so you don't have to go check the webpage out. And it's really formatted nice. You don't get a lot of spam. It's really tasteful. I like it. Twitter, these are some people you should follow if you're into Ember. So Ember.js, obviously, Ember Sherpa, Emberinos. They're all like different things that give you information about Ember. Follow the entire core team, because even if they're not tweeting about Ember, it's usually either really funny, or B, pretty interesting. The core team, and you can find them on the Ember.js site. And then these are some blogs and stuff. All of these, there's so many like blogs and people writing about Ember. These are the ones personally that I've gone through and either watched one of their videos or read a couple of their posts. Especially Evil Trout, who's one of the guys that writes the Discourse app. His blog is really good. Coderberry, I just found his blog recently, but it has some really awesome stuff on it. All right. And then the Ember Inspector. It's available on the Chrome store. We're going to hit the Ember Inspector in just 1 second. But I also just want to say for the last slide that EmberConf is also coming up. So we'll definitely also put it out on the mail list. But I'm going, so hope someone else is. Anyone else going, thinking possibly going? For a conference, it's actually super cheap. It's like $400, which is also in Portland, so you got a hotel and a plane ticket. But I've gone to RailsConf and some other ones, and they're usually like $800, if not more. So that should be pretty cool. So real quick, I want to promise we'll be drinking beer in a second. If you haven't played around with it yet, so we're just gonna go. This is Discourse. So this is another place you should go. This is like the Ember forums that's run on an Ember app called Discourse. But if you ever want to play around with the JavaScript app, this is really neat because JavaScript apps you can play around with. They're JavaScript. You can't get access to a Rails app source code. But the Ember Inspector works even on, so Ember Inspector, it's a Chrome app. I have two of them because I have the real one and the non-real one. But it lets you basically dive around any Ember app and figure out kind of how it was built. And you can inspect properties really easy. So we can see if we just like kind of view the tree here, like this is the whole application. This is the header, the search, the notifications. We can look at all the routes that they have defined. So remember when we were talking about routes, so they have a list hot. You see the route, the controller it gets. So if you're digging around in it, then you can also like inspect the properties of it and stuff. So if you're kind of like, something's built in Ember, or you're having a problem with your Ember app, the Ember Inspector is really awesome. If you are using one of the supported, Discourse kind of rolled their own data adapter. If you're using something that has a supported data adapter like Ember Model or Ember Data, you'll get all this info about the data too, so you can kind of see like how it's parsing your JSON responses and all that stuff. So it's really neat. So that's my talk. Thank you everyone for coming to the first Ember Twin Cities meetup. You'll hear more from me on the meetup about when we should meet again and how often we should meet again. Who would come to another Ember meetup? You can hurt my feelings. All right, sweet. Who thinks we should do it once a month? Every other month? Okay, so maybe we'll just do it every month, and that way if you don't want to come that month, there's room for other people.
Every day.
Every day, Ember every day. All right, so thank you again for coming. We don't have to validate your parking or anything, so stick around, have a beer. If you have any questions, or it seems like there's a couple of people in here using Ember too, so you can ask us stuff. We might know something. Thank you.